The homeless stranger my mother invited to dinner changed our family forever.
Now!
A porcelain plate shattered across the restaurant floor. You can't sit here. A waiter snapped as he reached for the young woman's arm. This is a private dining area. Get out before you scare away our customers. I'm sorry, the young woman whispered, pulling her arm back. I wasn't asking for money. I just wanted to know if there were any leftovers before you threw them away. Several diners turned to stare. Someone laughed. Another customer shook his head. These people have no shame anymore. The young woman lowered her eyes, clutching a worn backpack against her chest as if it were the only thing she had left in the world. Just as she turned to leave, a calm voice echoed across the restaurant. Who told you she wasn't welcome? The room fell silent. Every eye shifted toward the woman walking out from the kitchen. She wasn't wearing expensive jewelry or flashy designer clothes, yet everyone in the restaurant immediately recognized her. Margaret Ashford, owner of Ashford House, the most respected restaurant in Brookhaven. She looked from the frightened young woman to the waiter. Did she threaten anyone? No, ma'am. Did she steal anything? No. Did she insult our guests? No. Then why are you treating her like she's less than human? The waiter swallowed hard. I was only trying to protect the restaurant. Margaret's voice became firmer. The reputation of this restaurant isn't protected by pushing hungry people into the street. It's protected by how we treat them. Nobody dared speak. Margaret stepped toward the young woman and smiled gently. What is your name? The young woman hesitated. Claire. Claire what? Claire Dawson. When was the last time you had a proper meal, Claire? Claire forced a weak smile. I honestly can't remember. Margaret stared at her for several seconds. She could see exhaustion hidden behind Claire's brave face. The faded backpack. The worn sneakers. The trembling hands she kept trying to hide. But she also noticed something else. Even after everything life had thrown at her, Claire still stood with quiet dignity. Margaret pulled out a chair near her own table. Sit. Claire blinked. What? Sit beside me. I can't. You can. The customers. Margaret slowly turned toward the dining room. If anyone here believes compassion is bad for business, the door is right there. Silence. No one moved. One elderly man quietly began clapping. Another customer joined him. Within seconds, several people applauded. Claire looked overwhelmed. I don't want to cause trouble. Margaret smiled. The only trouble would be letting you leave hungry. She turned toward the kitchen. James. The head chef appeared instantly. Yes, Mrs. Ashford? I want tonight's best meal. For you? For my guest. The chef smiled warmly. Right away. Claire looked ready to cry. You don't have to do this. I know. Then why? Margaret paused before answering. Because many years ago someone showed kindness to me when I desperately needed it. I've never forgotten. Claire slowly sat down. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the glass of water placed before her. As the chef disappeared into the kitchen, Margaret leaned forward. You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world. Claire laughed softly. Some days it feels heavier. Meanwhile, near the entrance, two elegantly dressed women whispered loud enough for others to hear. This is ridiculous. I won't eat in a place where homeless people are invited to dine. Margaret heard every word. She stood. If you're unhappy with my decision, your meals tonight are complimentary. The women looked surprised. Really? Yes. They smiled. How generous. Margaret continued. And after tonight, you never have to return. The smiles disappeared. You'd lose paying customers over her? Margaret looked directly into their eyes. I'd rather lose customers than lose my humanity. The entire restaurant fell silent again. One by one, diners lowered their eyes. Even the women had nothing left to say. Moments later, steaming dishes began arriving. Fresh bread, roasted vegetables, grilled salmon, creamy mashed potatoes, soup, fresh fruit, a slice of homemade apple pie. Claire stared at the table. This can't all be for me. It is. I've never eaten food that looks like this. Margaret picked up her fork. Then let's change that. Claire hesitated before taking her first bite. The moment she tasted the food, tears rolled down her cheeks. She tried to hide them. I'm sorry. What are you apologizing for? I told myself I wasn't going to cry anymore. Margaret reached across the table and placed a napkin beside her. Sometimes tears don't mean weakness. Claire wiped her face. They remind us we're still human. For several minutes they ate in silence. Not an awkward silence. A peaceful one. When Claire finally looked up, Margaret noticed she was eating slowly, almost carefully. You're taking tiny bites. Claire smiled shyly. I guess I'm trying to make it last. Margaret's heart sank. Nobody should ever have to think like that. After another few minutes, Margaret asked quietly, Tell me something, Claire. Where is your family? Claire's smile disappeared. I don't have one. No parents. I never knew them. Siblings? She shook her head. I grew up in St. Martha's Children's Home. Margaret listened without interrupting. I stayed there until I turned 18. After that, I was on my own. Were you able to find work? Claire nodded. I worked everywhere. Grocery stores. Cafes. Cleaning offices. Anything honest. What happened? Claire looked down at her plate. I trusted the wrong person. Margaret didn't rush her. My fiancé convinced me we should invest everything we had into a small business. Did you? Claire nodded again. I gave him every dollar I'd saved over 5 years. And then, he disappeared. Margaret's expression hardened. He emptied our account, sold everything in our apartment while I was at work, and vanished. My goodness! I came home with groceries, and there wasn't even a bed left. Margaret covered her mouth. The landlord changed the locks 2 days later because the rent hadn't been paid. Did you report him? I did. What happened? Claire let out a bitter laugh. They said they'd look into it. And? I never heard from anyone again. She looked out through the restaurant window. 8 months. What? I've been homeless for 8 months. Margaret felt her chest tighten. Where have you been sleeping? Wherever the rain doesn't reach. You mean? Bus stations. Shelters when there's space. Empty buildings. Sometimes park benches. Margaret could barely believe the young woman sitting across from her had endured so much without losing her gentleness. Then Claire reached into her backpack and carefully removed a small silver locket. I kept this through everything. Margaret frowned. Is it from your parents? I don't know. It was around my neck when I was left at the orphanage. Margaret's eyes fixed on the locket. Her breathing slowed. Something about it felt strangely familiar. Very familiar. She couldn't explain why, but she suddenly felt as though she had seen that locket somewhere before. And for the first time in more than 20 years, a painful memory she had buried deep inside her heart began forcing its way back to the surface. Margaret couldn't take her eyes off the silver locket. May I? She asked softly. Claire hesitated for a moment before placing it gently into Margaret's palm. It's the only thing I've never lost, Claire said. When I was little, the sisters at St. Martha's told me it was found around my neck. They said maybe one day it would help me discover who I really was. Margaret slowly turned the pendant over. Her fingers froze. On the back, almost worn away by time, were 2 tiny engraved lilies intertwined around a single letter. The letter V. A sudden ache gripped her chest. No, she whispered. Claire looked puzzled. Is something wrong? Margaret quickly closed the locket and handed it back with a smile that barely concealed the storm inside her. No, it just reminds me of something from a long time ago. Claire slipped it back into her backpack. I'm sorry if it brought back bad memories. Margaret forced a gentle smile. Some memories deserve to be remembered. Before Claire could respond, James returned carrying 2 cups of hot tea. I thought you ladies might like something warm. Thank you, James, Margaret said. James looked at Claire with fatherly kindness. You eat here any time you're hungry, understand? Claire blinked. You mean that? I do. She smiled for what seemed like the first genuine smile of the evening. Thank you. After James walked away, Margaret leaned forward. So, what were your plans after tonight? Claire laughed quietly. I hadn't thought that far. You didn't know where you'd sleep? I usually figure it out before midnight. Margaret shook her head. No. Claire looked confused. No. You're not spending another night on the streets. Claire immediately straightened. I couldn't possibly. You could. I'd be imposing. You wouldn't. I don't even know you. Margaret smiled. And yet somehow I feel like I've known you much longer than tonight. Claire looked away. I appreciate your kindness, but people change their minds. I won't. They always do. Margaret heard more than words. She heard disappointment, broken promises, abandonment. Who changed their mind about you? Margaret asked. Claire stared into her tea. A lot of people. My fiancé. My friends. People who said they'd help. They always said, give me a few days. A few days became weeks. Then they stopped answering. Margaret reached across the table. I won't disappear. Claire looked at her. People usually make promises because they feel sorry for me. I'm not offering pity. What then? A chance. Claire frowned. For what? For life to start again. Silence settled between them. Finally Claire whispered, why? Margaret answered honestly. Because if our places were reversed, I'd pray someone would do the same for me. Claire's eyes filled again. I don't know how to repay kindness like that. You don't. What do you mean? You simply accept it. Claire nodded slowly. Then, thank you. An hour later they walked outside together. Rain had started falling. Margaret noticed Claire instinctively pulled her backpack beneath her coat before covering herself. She wasn't protecting herself. She was protecting the backpack. You guard that bag like treasure. Claire smiled. Everything I own is inside. Margaret quietly thought. No one should have to fit their entire life into one backpack. Her driver pulled the car around. Claire stopped walking. I've never ridden in a car like this. It's only a car. It doesn't look like only a car. Margaret laughed. Come on. Claire climbed inside carefully, almost afraid she'd damage something. The drive through Brookhaven was quiet. Claire stared out the window at familiar streets she'd walked countless times. Everything looked different from inside a warm vehicle. So this is what dry windows feel like, she whispered. Margaret smiled without saying anything. 25 minutes later, the gates of Ashford Manor slowly opened. Claire gasped. You live here? It's quieter than it looks. The car stopped beneath the entrance. Claire remained frozen. I can't. You can. This place is bigger than the orphanage. Margaret laughed. And emptier. The front doors opened. An older woman hurried toward them. Mrs. Ashford. Good evening, Evelyn. The housekeeper smiled until she noticed Claire. Her expression changed ever so slightly. Margaret noticed. Evelyn, this is Claire. Evelyn nodded politely. Good evening. Claire will be staying with us. For tonight? Evelyn asked. For as long as she wishes. Evelyn looked surprised but recovered quickly. Very well. Margaret turned toward Claire. You'll have the guest suite. Claire nearly dropped her backpack. The guest suite. Unless you'd prefer another room. I've never had a room. Margaret paused. What do you mean? I've never had one to myself. The words hit Margaret harder than she expected. Evelyn quietly led Claire upstairs. A few moments later a gasp echoed through the hallway. Then another. Then silence. Margaret smiled. She could imagine exactly what Claire had seen. A warm bed. Fresh towels. Clean clothes. Flowers on the dresser. A room prepared for guests who rarely came. Meanwhile, Margaret walked into her study. She opened an old wooden cabinet. Inside were carefully preserved keepsakes. Letters. Photographs. Hospital bracelets. And a small velvet box. With trembling hands she opened it. Inside lay half of a broken silver pendant. 2 lilies intertwined around the letter. V. Margaret's heart nearly stopped. She picked up her phone. Hello. Marcus. A man's calm voice answered. It's late, Margaret. I know. You sound shaken. I need you to investigate someone. Who? A young woman named Claire Dawson. What happened? I think. Margaret stopped herself. No. I need facts before I say anything. What do you need? Everything. Birth records. Orphanage records. Hospital archives. I don't care how long it takes. Marcus became serious. You think this is connected to 23 years ago? Margaret closed her eyes. I pray I'm wrong. And if you're right? She looked again at the broken pendant in her hand. Then someone stole far more than my child. Upstairs, Claire stood alone in front of the bedroom mirror. She barely recognized herself after taking a hot shower and changing into clean clothes Evelyn had laid out for her. She touched the soft sweater. It even smells new, she whispered. She looked toward the enormous bed. For several minutes she simply stared. Finally she sat carefully on the edge, afraid she'd wrinkle the sheets. Then she lay back. The mattress gently sank beneath her. Comfortable. She covered her face with both hands and quietly sobbed. Not because she was sad. Because for the first time in 8 months, she didn't have to wonder where she would sleep. Just as she was drifting off, someone knocked softly. Claire. Come in. Margaret entered carrying a glass of warm milk. My grandmother always said it helps people sleep. Claire smiled. I don't remember the last time someone brought me something before bed. Margaret handed her the glass. I wanted to ask you one more question. Of course. Have you ever tried to find your biological family? Claire nodded. For years. Did you find anything? Only dead ends. No names. No. No documents? Nothing. The orphanage said whoever left me there disappeared before sunrise. Margaret hesitated. Do you remember how old you were? They estimated I was only a few days old. Margaret's fingers tightened around the empty tray. A few days? Claire noticed. Mrs. Ashford, are you all right? Margaret smiled gently. I'm just thinking. About what? She looked directly into Claire's eyes. About how strange life can be. Neither of them noticed the shadow standing silently at the end of the upstairs hallway. Evelyn. She had heard every word, and the frightened expression on her face suggested she knew far more about Claire's past than either of them could possibly imagine. Evelyn remained hidden in the dimly lit hallway until Margaret closed Claire's bedroom door. She didn't move. Her hands trembled. No, it can't be, she whispered to herself. For years she had buried memories she hoped would never return. Yet seeing the silver locket around Claire's neck had awakened questions she had spent decades forcing herself to forget. She hurried downstairs. Margaret was standing near the fireplace, staring absent-mindedly into the flames. Evelyn, she called. The housekeeper stopped. Yes, Mrs. Ashford? You've been with this family for almost 30 years. I have. Margaret studied her face. Have you ever believed that some people are brought into our lives for a reason? Evelyn hesitated. I think God has his own ways. Margaret nodded slowly. I can't explain it, but that young woman feels strangely familiar. Evelyn's heartbeat quickened. Perhaps she reminds you of someone. Perhaps. Margaret sighed. I'm probably imagining things. Evelyn forced a faint smile. Maybe you should get some rest. Maybe. But neither woman slept well that night. The following morning, Claire woke before sunrise. For several moments she simply stared at the ceiling. She smiled. The bed. The blankets. The silence. None of it had been a dream. A gentle knock came at the door. Miss Claire? Evelyn called. Yes. Breakfast is ready whenever you are. Claire quickly got dressed and made her way downstairs. The dining room was larger than some apartments she had once cleaned. Margaret was already seated with a newspaper and a cup of coffee. There you are, she said warmly. I hope you slept well. Claire laughed softly. I think I slept too well. Margaret smiled. Good. That's exactly what you needed. Claire sat carefully. I still feel like I don't belong here. Margaret looked at her kindly. Then let me tell you a secret. What? The first time I entered this house after marrying my husband, I felt exactly the same. You did. I thought every chair was too expensive to sit on. Claire laughed. So what changed? Margaret smiled. I eventually realized a house only becomes a home because of the people inside it. Evelyn quietly served breakfast. Fresh fruit, eggs, toast. Claire looked uncertain. Is all this really for breakfast? Margaret chuckled. James would be offended if we ate any less. Claire picked up her fork. I'll never get used to this. You don't have to. They had barely begun eating when Margaret's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. Marcus. If you'll excuse me. She stepped onto the terrace and answered. Tell me. I started digging first thing this morning, Marcus said. That was fast. You sounded desperate. I visited St. Martha's Children's Home. Margaret's heart skipped. And? The records are incomplete. What do you mean? Several files from 23 years ago disappeared. Margaret frowned. Disappeared? They weren't lost. They were removed. Can you prove it? The archive index shows they existed. But the folders themselves are gone. Margaret's expression hardened. Someone covered their tracks. That's exactly what I think. What about Claire? There is one file. What does it say? Very little. Found outside the orphanage before sunrise. No parents identified. No birth certificate. No hospital information. No witnesses. Margaret closed her eyes. It doesn't make sense. It gets stranger. Go on. The sister who admitted the baby is still alive. Margaret's voice became urgent. Where is she? A nursing home outside River Glen. Can she still speak? According to the staff, yes. I'm going. Today. Immediately. I'll meet you there. Margaret ended the call. She stood silently for several seconds before returning inside. Claire looked up. Everything all right? Margaret smiled. Just business. Claire nodded. I can leave if you're busy. Margaret looked almost offended. Leave? I don't want to interrupt your life. You aren't interrupting anything. I've already taken enough of your time. Margaret sat beside her instead of across the table. Claire. Yes. Has anyone ever told you that you're allowed to receive kindness without feeling guilty? Claire looked down. No. Then I'm telling you now. Claire smiled faintly. I'll try to believe that. I hope you do. A few hours later, Margaret and Marcus arrived at the nursing home. An elderly nun welcomed them. You've come to see Sister Agnes. Yes. She's expecting you. Margaret exchanged a surprised glance with Marcus. Expecting us? The nun nodded. She said someone would come asking about the little girl. Margaret felt chills run down her spine. They entered a quiet room where an elderly woman sat beside a window knitting a blanket. Her hair was completely white. Her hands trembled with age. Yet her eyes remained remarkably sharp. She smiled gently. I've waited many years for this day. Margaret stepped closer. You know why we're here? Sister Agnes nodded. I believe so. Margaret sat opposite her. 23 years ago. The old nun interrupted softly. A baby was left at our doorstep before dawn. Margaret's breath caught. You remember? I remember every abandoned child. Marcus quietly activated his recorder. Sister Agnes continued. Most babies arrived wrapped in old blankets. That little girl arrived wrapped in the finest blanket I had ever touched. Margaret leaned forward. Did she have anything with her? The old nun smiled sadly. Yes. A silver locket. Margaret's eyes widened. The same one Claire still carries. Sister Agnes nodded. I prayed someone would find her family. Margaret struggled to steady her voice. Who brought her? The old woman closed her eyes. I never saw the person's face. Why not? It was raining heavily. They placed the baby in a basket. Then disappeared before anyone reached the gate. Marcus asked quietly, did anyone ever come looking for her? Sister Agnes was silent. Then she slowly nodded. Yes. Margaret's heart pounded. Who? A woman. When? About 3 weeks later. What did she want? She begged to see the baby. Margaret whispered. Did you let her? No. Why? She refused to tell us who she was. What happened? She cried. A great deal. Then she left. Margaret could barely breathe. Did you ever see her again? No. Marcus asked another question. Do you remember what she looked like? Sister Agnes looked directly at Margaret. I never forgot her face. Margaret leaned closer. Can you describe her? The old nun smiled sadly. I don't have to. Why? Because. She reached out with her trembling hand and gently touched Margaret's cheek. I'm looking at her. The room fell completely silent. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. What are you saying? I recognized you the moment you walked through that door. Marcus stared at both women in disbelief. Sister Agnes continued softly. You were the woman who came searching for that little girl. Margaret shook her head in confusion. No. I was told my baby died. You were. I buried an empty coffin. I know. Margaret's voice broke. Then how could I have come looking for another baby? Sister Agnes lowered her eyes. Because a mother's heart sometimes knows what her mind has been forced to believe. Before Margaret could ask another question, the nursing home door suddenly burst open. A breathless young nurse rushed inside. Sister Agnes. What is it? There's a man outside asking about today's visitors. Marcus immediately stood. What man? The nurse swallowed. He wouldn't give his name. But he said if anyone asked questions about a baby left here 23 years ago, she looked directly at Margaret. They'd be making the biggest mistake of their lives. Marcus was already moving before the young nurse finished speaking. Stay here, he said firmly. Margaret stood up. I'm coming with you. No. I'm not hiding while someone threatens me. Marcus knew better than to argue. He nodded once and hurried toward the front entrance with Margaret close behind. The parking lot was almost empty. A light breeze rustled the trees. No one was there. Marcus scanned every corner before crouching near the curb. Tire marks, he muttered. Margaret looked around. He's gone. A security guard came jogging toward them. I'm sorry, the man said between breaths. A black SUV sped away just before you came outside. Did you see the driver? Marcus asked. The guard shook his head. The windows were tinted. Did you catch the license plate? No, sir. Marcus frowned. Someone knew we were here. Margaret folded her arms. Which means we're asking the right questions. Marcus looked at her. Or the dangerous ones. Back inside, Sister Agnes looked visibly shaken. I never imagined they would still be watching. Margaret pulled a chair closer. They. The old nun hesitated. I've kept quiet for too many years. Marcus sat opposite her. Then today is the day to stop. The old woman looked toward the window before speaking. About 6 months after the baby arrived, a gentleman came to the orphanage. What did he want? Margaret asked. He offered us money. Marcus leaned forward. How much? Enough to repair the entire orphanage. Margaret's expression darkened. And what did he ask for in return? He wanted every record connected to the little girl. Margaret's jaw tightened. Did you give them to him? No. So what happened? He became angry. Very angry. He said the child had no future. Marcus asked quietly, did he tell you his name? No. But. She closed her eyes. I remember something. What? He had a signet ring. Margaret's heart skipped. What was on it? A silver hawk. Marcus immediately reached into his briefcase. He pulled out an old family photograph Margaret had given him the previous evening. Like this? Sister Agnes stared at it. Yes. Exactly like that. Margaret looked down at the photograph. The ring belonged to only one person. Her late husband's older brother. Victor Ashford. Marcus spoke slowly. So Victor knew the child was alive. Margaret nodded almost absent-mindedly. He didn't just know. He tried to erase her. Silence settled over the room. Finally Margaret whispered, all these years. I blamed myself. I thought I failed my daughter. Tears rolled down her cheeks. And she was alive. Marcus rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. We don't know for certain that Claire is your daughter. Margaret looked at him. No. But every answer points in the same direction. Marcus nodded. Which is why we need proof. The DNA test. Exactly. Margaret stood. Let's not waste another minute. Back at Ashford Manor, Claire had spent the afternoon helping Evelyn prepare lunch. You don't have to do that, Evelyn said as Claire dried a plate. I know. Then why are you helping? Claire smiled. I like feeling useful. Evelyn watched her quietly. You've had a difficult life. Claire shrugged. So have a lot of people. Yet you're not bitter. Claire placed another plate on the shelf. I've met bitter people. They're usually hurting more than they're willing to admit. Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. You remind me of someone. Claire laughed. Mrs. Ashford said the same thing. Evelyn's smile faded. I'm sure she did. Before Claire could ask what she meant, the front door opened. Margaret hurried inside with Marcus. Claire immediately noticed the change in Margaret's face. You look worried. Margaret forced a smile. Long day. Claire walked closer. Did something happen? Margaret looked into Claire's eyes. There is something I need to ask you. Anything. Would you be willing to take a DNA test? Claire blinked. A DNA test? Yes. Why? Margaret glanced briefly at Marcus. I've been looking into your past. Claire's expression changed instantly. You investigated me? I know it sounds intrusive. You hired someone to follow me? No. I hired someone to find answers. Claire took a step back. Without telling me? I was afraid you'd refuse. Claire's voice trembled. You should have trusted me enough to ask. Margaret realized her mistake. You're right. I should have. Claire wrapped her arms around herself. I thought. What? I thought you were the first person who accepted me without wanting something. Margaret stepped forward. I don't want to hurt you. Then tell me the truth. Marcus quietly walked into the library, giving them privacy. Margaret took a deep breath. The night we met. You showed me your silver locket. Claire nodded. So. I own something almost identical. Claire frowned. What does that mean? I don't know. But I lost a baby 23 years ago. Claire's eyes widened. You think? I don't know what to think. I only know there are too many coincidences. Claire stared at her in disbelief. You think I might be? Margaret couldn't finish the sentence. Neither could Claire. The room became unbearably quiet. Finally Claire whispered, if the test proves you're wrong. Margaret nodded. I'll apologize for putting you through this. And if you're right? Margaret's eyes filled with tears again. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for every birthday, every Christmas, every hug we lost. Claire looked down at the floor. Her breathing became uneven. I've imagined meeting my mother thousands of times. Margaret waited. In every version. Claire swallowed hard. She came looking for me. Margaret broke down. I never stopped. Claire looked up. What? I was told my baby died. I visited the cemetery every week. I talked to a grave. I brought flowers. I celebrated birthdays beside a headstone. Claire felt tears rolling down her own face. I didn't know. You couldn't have. I thought. What? That maybe my mother abandoned me because she didn't love me. Margaret immediately shook her head. No. If you're my daughter. She gently placed both hands on Claire's shoulders. Then understand this before anything else. There was never a single day that you were unwanted. Claire could no longer hold back. She collapsed into Margaret's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Margaret held her tightly. Not as someone certain she had found her daughter, but as a woman holding another broken soul who desperately needed to hear those words. Marcus quietly watched from the library doorway. He smiled for only a second before his phone vibrated. His expression changed immediately. He answered. Marcus speaking. A nervous voice came through the line. Mr. Reed? Yes. This is Olivia from Brookhaven Memorial Hospital. You asked me to look into records from 23 years ago. Marcus straightened. What did you find? There are records. I knew it. But... She lowered her voice. Someone broke into the archives less than an hour ago. Marcus's face went pale. What? They weren't looking for money. They weren't looking for equipment. They were looking for one file. What file? The maternity records from the week Margaret Ashford gave birth. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Were they successful? There was a long silence. Then Olivia answered in a frightened whisper. No. They destroyed every single record. Marcus lowered the phone slowly. For a long moment, he simply stood there. Margaret noticed the color had drained from his face. What happened? Marcus looked at Claire first, then back at Margaret. We have a problem. Margaret gently released Claire and walked toward him. What kind of problem? The hospital archives were broken into. Her heart skipped. When? Less than an hour ago. And? Marcus took a deep breath. The maternity records from the week your daughter was born. He paused. They've all been destroyed. The room fell silent. Claire looked from one face to another. I don't understand. Margaret clenched her fists. They're trying to erase the truth. Marcus nodded. And they're panicking. Which means we're getting closer. Claire's voice was barely audible. Who would do something like that? Margaret answered before Marcus could. Someone with everything to lose. Just then, Evelyn walked into the room carrying a tray of tea. She stopped the instant she sensed the tension. Is everything all right? Margaret turned toward her. No. The hospital records have been destroyed. The tray slipped from Evelyn's hands. Cups shattered across the marble floor. Everyone stared at her. Evelyn covered her mouth. I'm so sorry. Margaret frowned. Evelyn. The older woman couldn't hide the fear in her eyes. Claire immediately bent down to help gather the broken pieces. It's okay. Accidents happen. No. Evelyn blurted. Everyone froze. She quickly lowered her voice. Don't touch the glass. You'll cut yourself. Margaret studied her carefully. You've been nervous since Claire arrived. Evelyn forced a smile. I'm just getting old. No. Margaret stepped closer. Something is frightening you. Evelyn looked away. I don't know what you mean. You do. I don't. Margaret's voice softened. Evelyn. You've worked beside me for nearly 3 decades. I trust you. If you're hiding something, please tell me. The older woman closed her eyes. I can't. Margaret's heart sank. You can't. Or you won't. Evelyn whispered. I made a promise. To whom? No answer. Margaret took another step. Was it my husband? Evelyn shook her head. No. Victor. Evelyn remained silent. That silence was answer enough. Marcus immediately noticed it. You know Victor Ashford. I worked for this family. That's not what I asked. Marcus walked closer. You know something about Victor. Evelyn's breathing became uneven. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. Claire looked confused. Hurt? Margaret spoke gently. Evelyn. If you know anything about my daughter... The older woman suddenly burst into tears. I didn't know she was alive. Margaret's knees nearly gave way. What did you say? I swear I didn't know. Margaret grabbed her hands. Evelyn. Look at me. What are you talking about? Evelyn cried harder. Victor came here the night after your husband died. Margaret's face hardened. What did he want? He made me promise never to mention something I overheard years earlier. Marcus quickly pulled out a notebook. What did you overhear? Evelyn looked terrified. I was cleaning the library. Victor didn't know I was there. He was arguing with your husband. Margaret whispered. About what? The baby. Claire stopped breathing. What baby? Evelyn looked at her with tears streaming down her face. You. The room seemed to spin. Margaret tightened her grip on Evelyn's hands. What exactly did they say? I only heard part of it. Tell me every word you remember. Evelyn nodded through her tears. Victor said. She closed her eyes, recalling the conversation. Dead babies don't inherit fortunes. Margaret gasped. Evelyn continued. Your husband shouted at him. He said, I never agreed to this. Marcus looked up sharply. So your husband knew? I think. Evelyn swallowed. I think he discovered the truth after it happened. Margaret felt her heart breaking all over again. My husband. He believed our daughter died. I thought so too. But Victor told him. She struggled to continue. That some mistakes could never be undone. Claire whispered. Oh my God. Evelyn nodded. Your husband cried. I had never seen him cry before. He kept saying, bring her back. Margaret covered her face. He tried. I believe he did. What happened? Victor threatened him. With what? I don't know. But after that day, they never spoke to each other again. Marcus exchanged a glance with Margaret. This changes everything. Margaret nodded slowly. My husband wasn't part of the conspiracy. He was another victim. Claire quietly wiped away her tears. So, someone stole a baby and destroyed an entire family. No one answered, because everyone knew she was right. Just then the doorbell rang. Twice. 3 times. James hurried in from the kitchen. I'll get it. A minute later he returned, looking uneasy. Mrs. Ashford. There's a gentleman asking for Miss Claire. Claire frowned. For me? James nodded. He says his name is Daniel. Claire's face instantly lost its color. No. Margaret noticed immediately. You know him. Claire whispered. I wish I didn't. Who is he? Claire looked toward the front door as though seeing a ghost. My fiancé. The one who stole everything from me. Margaret's expression became ice cold. He's here. Claire nodded. I don't know how he found me. Before anyone could stop her, Margaret walked toward the entrance. Marcus followed. Claire hurried after them. James opened the front door. A well-dressed man stood on the porch holding a bouquet of white roses. He smiled the moment he saw Claire. There you are. Claire's voice trembled with anger. You've got some nerve. Daniel ignored her and looked directly at Margaret. You must be Mrs. Ashford. Margaret didn't offer her hand. What do you want? I've come for Claire. Claire laughed bitterly. You don't get to come for me. Daniel sighed dramatically. I know you're upset. Upset? You robbed me. You disappeared. You left me sleeping on the streets. Daniel lowered his voice as if speaking to a child. It wasn't like that. Claire stepped forward. Then tell everyone what it was like. He glanced around the room. This isn't the place. No. Claire folded her arms. This is exactly the place. Margaret remained silent, watching him carefully. Daniel smiled politely. I've been looking everywhere for her. Claire scoffed. Really? For 8 months. I made mistakes. You destroyed my life. I can explain. Then explain. Daniel took a deep breath. The investment failed. Claire laughed in disbelief. The investment? You emptied our account. You sold my furniture. You even pawned my grandmother's watch. Daniel shrugged. I was trying to save us. You were trying to save yourself. Margaret finally spoke. Mr. Daniel, do you honestly expect anyone here to believe that story? He smiled confidently. You don't know Claire. Margaret's eyes narrowed. I know enough. Daniel's smile widened. Do you? He reached into his briefcase. I have documents. Claire frowned. What documents? Daniel slowly pulled out a thick envelope. I can prove. He looked directly at Margaret. That Claire hasn't told you the whole truth. And as he opened the envelope, Claire felt her heart sink. Because she recognized one of the papers immediately. It was a document that should have been impossible for Daniel to possess. The original admission record from St. Martha's Children's Home. The very record everyone believed had disappeared forever.
If this story has touched your heart in any way, take a second to support the channel. Subscribe, like, and tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing viewers from around the world. And whatever you do, don't miss the next episode. The truth about Claire's past, the Ashford family secret, and Daniel's shocking document are about to change everything. Stay with us until the very end.